You're listening to Trek FM.
Hello, and welcome to From There to Here, Trek FM's daily rewatch of Star Trek, in which we look at all 729 episodes over the course of the year. I'm Mike from Stage 9.
And I'm Brandon-Mutala from Melodic Treks and Warp 5.
And today we have two installments of Star Trek which we will be talking about. The final episode of Voyager, Endgame, and the final Next Generation movie, Nemesis. So we're going to wrap up the Prime timeline here today. Exciting stuff. So let's get started with Endgame. Brandon, do you want to give a synopsis of this episode?
Admiral Janeway from the future decides to go back in time and break the temporal prime directive by sending Captain Janeway to a Borg-infested nebula so that they can get home 20-some years earlier than usual.
Big Voyager finale. What did you think?
I think the last 30 seconds of this episode is garbage because we get no resolution for these characters after 7 years. I don't mind the episode itself. I know that a lot of people don't seem to like it. I enjoyed it a little bit more on this rewatch, but I don't think the episode is that bad. And honestly, as far as a Borg episode, I actually think it's one of the better Borg episodes as well. I think there's a lot of really cool concepts in it. I love the idea that they think it's hundreds of wormholes, you know, in this pocket of space, but it turns out to be that Borg transwarp conduit. I think they tried a little too hard to make it all good things, the Voyager version, you know, with the time travel and the old Janeway and old Picard and whatnot. They're like, how can we make this all good things because that was so successful, but not all good things and make it Voyager? Well, we make it all good things with the Borg. And, but I don't know. I don't mind the episode. I enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is definitely the weakest of all of the finales, if you count Undiscovered Country as the original series finale, that is. It really does not work for me in a lot of ways. I don't like the idea of Admiral Janeway coming back in time to change the timeline in order to get them home. I think that that's kind of selfish of her because, I mean, there's so much stuff which is going to change because of that. It's like, yeah, you know, Seven will still be alive, and yeah, they will get home sooner, and those are desirable qualities. But I mean, it's the, you know, it's the city on the edge of forever question, you know? And it's like, even if all that happens, how many different people are going to die, you know? I mean, because it's not like she's even like averting like some sort of apocalypse. I mean, she says like 20 people died over the span of 20 years, you know? And yes, that is tragic, but how many other different people are going to die because of this, or whose lives are going to be completely different? I mean, damn, we look at how many lives they saved over the span of 7 years. How many lives did they save over the span of the next 16 years that aren't going to be saved now because Voyager wasn't there? I mean, it gets into some really weird, shady, you know, ethical territory, and I have a problem with Admiral Janeway, you know, trying to come up with this, you know, in the first place, and I kind of have a problem with Captain Janeway too. Although Captain Janeway, you know, at least she kind of like sticks to her guns, which were established in Caretaker, and says like, we have a chance to do this thing, even if it means us not being able to get home. And they do decide to do that, and they are able to get home in the process. And I think that that's, you know, cool, and that's fine, and that doesn't really betray her, you know, whatever. But it's that kind of strikes a very weird, wrong chord with me. I mean, the idea of starting the episode, you know, in the future with Voyager already back home, I think that that's a really bold choice. And I think that if they did not involve time travel, if maybe they told the story of how they got home over the span of like 23 years or whatever it was, I think that would have made for a much better episode, really. But by saying like, we're going to go back in time so that they get home, I mean, we're dealing with a show that takes place in the 24th century. We don't need to do a year-to-year parallel thing to our, time. And, that's something which Star Trek has always done, and I have never understood why. Why can't you have an episode like Year of Hell, which takes place over the span of a year, and then at the end of the episode, you're a year ahead in the future? I mean, Battlestar Galactica did that. Why can't you do that on Star Trek? Especially, after, at this point when Voyager's the only show which is running, you don't even have another show to line up to, in terms of the timeline or whatever. I don't know. Like, all of these things are problems for me. Them facing the Borg, that's another thing which I think they did way too much here. At least they have a much more reasonable explanation for why they're able to defeat them than they do under normal circumstances. Although I still don't quite understand the whole thing with the Queen. I mean, like, they switched the Queen back to Alice Krieger. Like, why? How? I mean, didn't she, like, disintegrate? I thought the whole idea was that she went to another. And also, and not that this is this thing's fault, it's First Contact's fault, but why is there a Queen? I mean, I know why there's a Queen from a storytelling standpoint, but by having a Queen, by giving a face to the Borg, you're kind of destroying the point of the Borg. I don't know why you would do that, aside from, whatever, dramatic whatever. And that's, something which goes beyond this particular episode, but whatever. And yes, you are absolutely right that they, having them get home and, basically it's just like the end of an episode, just like any other episode. That's so cheap because, we want to see them get home. Yes, but we want to see them at home. That should have happened at the end of Act 4, right? And then Act 5 should be them at home.
Right.
I don't know. Or, what it should have it should have happened at the end of hour, 173 or whatever it is, and then hour 174 is them at home. I don't know. It should have been something different. Like, they should have started it the way that they started it, with them home, and then tell the story of them being, of them getting home. That would have been much more satisfying for me. I don't know. I'm ranting now, but whatever. Is it a terrible episode? No. Is it a terrible finale? Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. It's not a terrible episode. It's a terrible finale. Like, it's just, we've spent 7 years with these people trying to get home, and it's just not a good way to finish it. I mean, there's some really cool stuff in the episode, and there's so many things that happen over these 7 years. But I got to say that it does have one of my favorite things in this episode. One of my favorite things in Voyager's here. And that's when Icheb, he beats Tuvok at the Calto, and then Kim is all like, yeah, I'm feeling lucky here. And I love that little thing of how Harry Kim and Tuvok have been playing this game of Calto all these years, right? It's one of those things that I think would have come up because they would have had a lot of spare time in the Delta Quadrant. And it's one of those things where, like, 15 years from now, when Ensign Kim finally gets promoted to Lieutenant JG. Somebody's going to ask him when he's a captain someday, and he's going to be playing Calto, and they're like, "You play this Vulcan game?" And he's like, "Yeah, I spent all his years with this Vulcan, and I learned how to play it from him." And I don't know, like, it just, when I see him do that, I just think of a future for that character and him telling that story to somebody else later on. I don't know, maybe it's just a silly thing, but I really like that scene.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess my thing more than anything else, and it's kind of hard to put this into words, I guess, but you think about all good things. You think about what you leave behind. These are epic stories, right?
Right.
Epic finales. And you think about this, there's nothing epic about it. Like, it's not as epic as most of the two-parters that they had earlier in the show. It just feels like a slightly longer episode with, kind of like a big finale, but even not that big of a finale,
Right.
Anyway, should we move on to our next episode for today?
Do we have to?
Yeah, let's do this.
Okay, let's do it.
Star Trek Nemesis. This is the last Next Generation movie, and in some ways this is the Next Generation finale. We get two finales today. You want to give a synopsis of Nemesis?
Picard gets sent on a mission to the Romulan homeworld to make peace with the Romulans, except it's not the Romulans, it's the Remans. Except it's not the Remans, it's a clone of him. And he learns that he has some bad technology in his possession, and then they fight in the Mutara Nebula that's now green.
I don't know. I guess, just talking about Endgame now, I have a lot of similar problems with Nemesis. I do think that Nemesis is a good movie. I've said numerous times that I don't think that there's been a bad Star Trek movie yet. But that being said, I think that it's one of the weaker Star Trek movies. And the thing which I always think of when I think of Nemesis is the missed opportunities, and how I really feel like it should have been something more, and they kind of botched it in the process. I mean, I remember like back before this thing came out, when it was just in the writing phase, and reading the Star Trek Communicator, and they did those monthly or bi-monthly interviews with Rick Berman, and they asked him about everything that's going on in the franchise, and they were talking to him about the next Star Trek movie, and he's like, "Oh, it's going so well. We have a writer, someone who's new to the franchise, but he's a really big fan, and he's an A-list writer. And, we can't wait to see this." And, I was like, this is interesting. Who could this be? And then when they revealed that it was John Logan, I was like, oh, hell yes. Because John Logan, he wrote, people will be like, he wrote Gladiator, which is, great or whatever. But he also wrote some really, really good movies like Any Given Sunday, which is fantastic. And a bunch of other stuff. And he's written a bunch of stuff since then. So to hear that, like, you have an A-list writer coming on to write this movie, and he's a huge Star Trek fan. I mean, that's insane. He was giving interviews where he's saying, like, I watched every episode of Next Generation leading up to this. Unlike some other people who worked on the movie, that really sort of like, it got me really excited. I mean, there was stuff like, we had it at my old job. I worked at a movie theater when the movie came out, and we had taped to the wall a quote that was in a magazine that we cut out from Will Wheaton, where he said, like, I read the script for Nemesis. It is easily the best Star Trek movie since Wrath of Khan. I mean, I remember seeing the first time I ever saw Larry Nemeczek at a convention was after this movie came out, and he talked about how when he read the script, he was just like, oh my God, this is epic. Like the way that these things that we saw on the screen played on the page was just so much larger, and like a massive blockbuster scale. And then what we ended up with was just something which was kind of average. And that's the thing that I think really bothers me, is there was so much promise. It should have been the next Wrath of Khan, but in reality, it was the next Final Frontier.
Right. One of my last episodes of Melodic Treks, episode 67, I actually did with Eric Woods from Cinematic Sound Radio. And when I watched the trailer for this movie, like, the trailer is better than the movie, I think, because when I was watching the trailer, it put all these images in my mind, and what I was expecting was like a mirror universe movie, and this is lore, and everybody's going to have some kind of alternate version of themselves that they're going to have to battle with, or something like that. Picard's got, for some reason, this young version of him that we're seeing in the trailers and stuff, but it fueled my creative juices in my mind. And so this movie that I thought was going to happen because of the trailer was so much better than what the final product was. I mean, there's a lot of really good special effects in this movie. It looks amazing, but the story just falls through. Like, I don't care about B4. This clone just doesn't work for me. Like, the Romulans are underutilized as it is, and now we're inventing this other weird thing. Like, it makes me think of the Enar as well. They just instituted these alternate Andorians in Enterprise, and it's weird. Like, we don't get enough Andorians as it is, so we should start talking about this other race of Andorians. We don't get enough Romulans. We should just start talking about the Remans. It felt like a hot mess, and It should have been so much more. Now, that being said, I enjoyed it a lot more on this rewatch this time. It's been a while since I've seen it, so I've had a little bit of distance and a little perspective on it, and I didn't mind it that much this time. It was a fun romp. I kind of knew what I was going to be getting when I went into it, but I just wish it could have been more.
Yeah, no, I agree. I wish it could have been more too. And, seeing it in the theater, it was so depressing because, I saw Generations on, opening night. I saw First Contact on opening night, and the energy in the crowd was just electric, And I went to the very first show of Nemesis at Yorktown, to see it in the THX, certified theater and everything like that. I couldn't wait. And I got into the theater, and it was like me and 5 other people. And I just remember how quiet the auditorium was, and it felt so small, and it really felt like this was the end of Star Trek. And in a lot of ways, it was,
One more thing that I do want to say about this, I listened to your last episode of Great Shot Kid, and it was while you were talking about it, I thought a lot about Nemesis as well. There's so much in the trailer that's not in the movie for Nemesis, as well as Rogue One.
I would love to see. Okay, I'm gonna say this. It's going to sound weird, but okay. If I were to sit down and watch Nemesis, I would only want to see the theatrical cut because the movie was directed by Stuart Baird, and Baird has talked about, Baird is an editor by trade, right? And he did additional editing on Rogue One, by the way. And, he is very, very good at that. And he has said that by and large, he said, like, with the exception of Blade Runner, almost all theatrical cuts are the best cuts of a given movie. And, this is something that he feels, and, he feels that the version of Nemesis which is out there is the best version of the movie you can get. I think he's wrong, but he's the filmmaker. I'm going to watch his vision. That being said, just for historical purposes, as sort of like a historical document, I really, really want to see the first cut or the assembly cut of Nemesis, just to see what that movie was originally intended to be. Or maybe an expanded comic book, kind of like they did with City on the Edge of Forever. Mm-hmm. Do that with the original screenplay for Nemesis or something. I just want to see what it was originally supposed to be.
I agree. I'm a big champion. I know I'm the only person on the planet, but I'm a big champion of Alien 3, and the assembly cut that they have of that is kind of neat. Something like that would be really cool to check out and just see, hey, here's some extra stuff, because we know there's deleted scenes because this crap was in the trailer. There's more stuff out there. And again, like you guys were saying on the Rogue One, there's some really cool lines that are in the trailer that aren't in the movie. Worf has a couple of great ones. Anyways, whatever.
Oh, well, yeah, what can you do? I will also say, on a personal note, this is the very last movie that I ever saw at McClurg Court Theater in Chicago, which is the best theater, just period. So that was disappointing. But, hey, what can you do? All right. Well, should we wrap this up for today?
You bet.
Brandon, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me here on the network with new episodes of Melodic Treks, which is all about the music of Star Trek, as well as several recent episodes of Warp 5. You can find me on Twitter at Brandon-Mutala, and you can find me on the Babel Conference every once in a while, poking my heads up. Or my one head. I just have one. Mike, where can people find you when you're not battling your clone?
You can find me right here on Trek FM doing Stage 9, where we talk about the people who make Star Trek. And you can also find me on the Nerd Party Network doing Great Shot Kid, which we were talking about, where we talk about the people who make Star Wars. And you can find me on commentarytrackstars.com with a brand new Christmas episode of Commentary Trackstars, where my co-host Max and I do a commentary for Mad Max Fury Road. And you can also find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K. All right, well, that's it for the Prime universe. No more Voyager, no more Next Gen, no more Prime. But tomorrow we will be back with the first 2 installments of the Kelvin timeline, Star Trek, and Star Trek Into Darkness.